So hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto is neglected by his family and becomes ANBU Black Ops. Part 1. If you guys enjoy this, what if, and you want the next part of this video, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends. And check out the description. And check out my playlist. So let's start the video. Chapter 4. 2 years later, Naruto, now 14, stood outside the academy with his hands in his pockets. His appearance hadn't changed much over the past 2 years. It hadn't changed at all actually. The only key differences being his gain in height and the loss of his once favorite jacket. He simply grew out of it, so he gave it to Minato to one day give it to Menma when he could fit it. Other than that, nothing had changed. His hair was still the same with the right side still shaven down more so than the rest. He still wore his black t-shirt and ANBU pants with black sandals. In addition to his ever-present look however was the necklace he wore that brandished the Uzumaki spiral symbol, a gift from his mother for his recent birthday a few months back. You could argue another addition was the new book he had shoved into his face. After so many years of reading and rereading the one he received from his friend all those years ago, people had come to associate it with his apparel. This book was green. As he read his new novel, he noticed the parents and other adult commoners beginning to chatter and mutter among themselves in awe. Looking to see what the commotion was, he turned to see Itachi walking his way. The brunette hadn't changed in the slightest. He still wore the same Uchiha high-collared shirt with his ANBU pants and sandals, and he still maintained that ponytail of his. His fame within the village was the only thing that altered. Itachi became the true essence of what it meant to be a Konoha shinobi. He was recognized publicly throughout the village for his accomplishment of becoming ANBU commander at the ripe age of 13, just a few months ago. Ever since, his popularity was rivaling that of the Hokage himself, which is a position most people said he was close to reaching. "Hello, Naruto," Itachi said, leaning against the wall next to the blonde as he waved at the group of parents waiting for their children to get out. "Hello to you as well, Itachi," Naruto replied, not looking up from his book. "Here for Sasuke?" "Yes. My mother is attending Yoshino-sama's baby shower as well," he replied as the blonde nodded. That was the reason he was going to be taking Mito and Menma for the remainder of the day. "What do you have planned for them?" Itachi asked. Naruto looked up and thought. "I am unsure. I imagined a bit of training and possibly something to eat a little later. Would you mind us joining? Izumi and I are watching over Sasuke for the day as well." Naruto nodded. "Of course. I must confess, I was not too interested in trying to entertain Mito and Menma all day anyways. Not alone that is." Itachi chuckled at that, understanding completely. With a resonating slam, the doors of the academy swung open. Kid after kid funneled out to their waiting parents or began their journey home with their friends. All of course pausing at the spectacle that was Itachi Uchiha. Eventually, the class holding all of the clan children was finally released. Sasuke was one of the first kids out. After greeting Naruto, Itachi said they were going to go on ahead and pick up Izumi and that they'd meet up later. And there, Naruto waited with his book in hand, unaware of the leering eyes upon his form. Eventually Mito and Menma came out and immediately began explaining their day down to the minor details. Naruto just listened in false interest all the way back to the Namikaze compound. When they arrived, Naruto began their training by having them do their normal warm-up routine while he read his book. When they finished, he instructed them to work on their chakra control by performing the tree climbing exercise as they balanced a leaf on their forehead simultaneously. They were of course disappointed as they were hoping for something a bit more deadly. Or at least new. To get them to work twice as hard, he told them if they worked hard enough, he would show them a technique so amazing that it could beat anyone within seconds. He was of course blowing smoke, but they didn't have to know that. It did have the desired effect of further motivating them as they pushed themselves twice as hard as they would have. When all that was said and done, they were finally joined by Itachi, Izumi, and Sasuke. "Okay guys," Naruto said dropping off of the tree he was resting in. "I think that's about enough training." "What?" Menma yelled still out of breath. "What about our super amazing technique?" Naruto looked at Itachi in amusement. "Oh yeah, that. Well, that is for another day. You guys are too tired now. Besides, we're gonna go eat." "What's the technique?" Sasuke asked Itachi in a low whisper. Itachi just chuckled, never giving a formal answer. "Naruto Nai, are you gonna take us to the party?" Mito asked. Naruto just looked at her while questioning. "It's Ino's birthday, they're having it at the Akimichi grill house," she informed him. "No. I don't want to go to that," Menma protested. "It's nothing but a bunch of stupid girls." "You're stupid," Mito yelled back, kicking off a fresh back and forth verbal fight between the two that the others ignored. Naruto sighed and looked over to Sasuke to break the tie. "What do you think, Sasuke? Would you like to go to the party or would you rather us go elsewhere to eat?" Sasuke, at first, was going to say no, but the look Mito gave him told him she'd be heartbroken if he did. He didn't care for her much, but he'd rather not make a girl cry. I guess it wouldn't hurt. Maybe we will see some of our friends there too. He said, directing that last sentence at Menma, who crossed his arms in defeat. And from there, the group headed out to the Akimichi grill house. Break. The happy birthday song just ended when the group finally made it. Cake was being served and they saw everyone else had probably already eaten. Well, Naruto said. We could just get a table in order then. But, Nai-san. Mito said, looking up at him. I want cake. You have not eaten Amato yet. It would be unwise to. Oh come on Naruto. Itachi said, just let them eat cake for dinner. Naruto looked down at Mito's pleading eyes and at Menma who, despite trying to stay mad, was looking over at the huge cake in hunger. I suppose it would not be so bad. He said, sending them off. The three ran into the party section in which one of the moms helping handed them a party hat and a plate so that they could get their slice. Naruto and the Uchiha couple found a seat towards the back of the restaurant. Naruto sat with his back to the wall to keep an eye on his two siblings. Hard to do with the book now shoved into his face. Itachi and Izumi were having their own conversation over something he had no interest or knowledge in, so he just continued reading. Every now and then, he'd glance up to make sure everything was still okay. A few times, he had thought he saw Kakashi again, but couldn't get a good enough look. The night's events went on as they usually did, with Naruto joining in the conversation as they ate their food and then seamlessly melding into his book, leaving the two once again to talk of their own things in virtual privacy. A few minutes went by and Naruto peeked over to the party again, wondering when it was going to be over. He had assumed it would be over rather quickly upon their tardy arrival, but they were still going at it. Sticking his nose back into his book, he continued reading until he finally heard the sound of child footsteps jogging towards their table. Looking up, he was greeted to the sight of Mito and another girl jogging up to the table, with the Hyuga heiress being dragged along as well. Naruto Nai. Mito yelled as she and the other two girls stood at their table. Itachi and Izumi stopped their conversation to watch the spectacle. I want you to meet my friends. She said happily as Naruto raised an eyebrow. I always tell you to meet them, but you're always too busy. She said, mimicking his voice to the best of her ability. Naruto closed his book with an amused expression. Well, okay then. He said, sitting straighter in his seat. The pink-haired girl was the first to respond. I'm Sakura Haruno. She said, extending her hand to the blonde. It's nice to meet you. I hope you're better than that Bakamenma. She said with a grimace. Naruto smiled at the girl. It is lovely to meet you, Sakura-san. I am Naruto. He said, disregarding her remark about his brother, choking it up to her possibly being one of Menma's pranking victims. But that said, the group sat in silence until Mito finally lost her patience. Ugh. Come on Hinata. He won't bite. She said. Hinata slowly crept out from behind the redhead. I'm Hinata. Hyuga. She said her last name so low it was almost inaudible. Naruto extended his hand to her as well, which she took timidly. It is an honor to meet you, Hinata-san. Naruto said with a reassuring smile that made her face heat up. There. Said Mito with a smile. Now you know all my friends. Except for Ino. She went to the bathroom. She said, craning her head around the room, trying to spot the blonde. When she did, she quickly flagged her down. Ino. Over here. The whole group looked her way for a brief second before Mito began talking again. Ino's heart was racing sporadically as she made her way over to the table, much more Hinata-like than she was comfortable with. On her way, she quickly ripped the birthday hat off of her head, throwing it onto some nearby table as she fixed her hair. When she finally made it over, she waited for Mito to finish whatever rant she was on as she discreetly examined the boy that melted her confidence down without even knowing it. His eyes were locked onto Mito with a soft smile that she couldn't help but stare at. And this, Mito began, breaking her from her daze. Is Ino. Aka, the birthday girl. Pulling her hand from behind her back for the briefest of waves, not directed at any of the table's occupants, she whispered a quick, hey. That was so out of character for her, Mito looked at her strangely. Oh, so, you're the birthday girl? Izumi asked in apparent excitement, in which Ino nodded. That's so cute. She said, gushing at the innocence of the blonde. In other words, demeaning her age considerably. How old are you? Clearing her throat so that she didn't stutter, she answered. 10. Well, happy birthday. Izumi said kindly with a smile. I too wish you a happy birthday. Itachi added. Ino threw the two a quick thank you as she tucked her bang behind her ear. Ino? Said Mito, grabbing her attention. She looked over at her, seeing she was gesturing towards Naruto. This is my brother Naruto. Naruto was already reaching forward to shake the girl's hand. It was very nice too. His statement stopped there as his nearly empty cup of water was now running down his leg, having been knocked down by the very shaky-handed girl. Oh no. Ino said in worry. I am so sorry. Luckily the cup wasn't full so there wasn't much of it. Naruto simply waved her off. It is quite alright. It was only a bit of water. No harm done. He said, extending his hand again. Ino reached a lot more gently this time so as to not embarrass herself further. I wish you a very happy birthday Ino-san. If I am not mistaken, it would seem your father is preparing to leave. He said giving her an escape. She looked over to see him paying the bill, quickly she bid the group bye as a whole and ran for him. Mito just raised her eyebrow at the strange occurrence. She had never seen the blonde act like that. Huh. Weird. She whispered to herself. 3 years later, perched in a tree, an ANBU member looked into the window of a secluded house. The rain above is doing well at muffling the screaming from within. His form was completely hidden within the shadow of the top of the tree above him, only being illuminated briefly by the flashes of lightning that struck sporadically. In his hand, his black sword held in a reverse grip. The ANBU watched the men guarding the house walk along a very strict pattern, not bothered by the rain in the slightest. Their weapons lazily held at the ready for anyone foolish enough to attack. They had no idea that their death was a mere 10 feet away, shifting his feet ready to pounce. When he did, they were gone before they even knew it. He went for the nearest guy first, slicing his throat before grabbing his body, laying him down gently. Then, he jumped up to the ledge the other was on. The guard was a ways away when he turned around. It was right at that moment that a flash of lightning hit, illuminating the ANBU's form and the sword flying at his head for a brief second. The very last thing he would see. The ANBU ran by, ripping his sword from the man's head, before jumping feet first into the tiny window that he barely made it through. When he landed, he realized how lucky he was as a guard had just passed by not 5 seconds before he jumped in and was already walking away. He snuck up behind him and snapped his neck in one clean motion. Shoving the body into the nearby closet, he continued on silently. He could hear a man screaming from the basement of the mansion. He made his way towards it, killing 2 more guards on his way. Suddenly, he heard the screaming man abruptly stop. Having the target located, he continued on, gently opening the door. Once inside, he saw a brown-haired man in a lab coat cleaning materials from the last experiment he was undergoing. He silently walked in. When the doctor reached over to set his scalpel down on the wooden nightstand, his hand was impaled by a kunai, nailing him to the surface, electing a scream of pain from him. Ah. Ah. The man turned around and plucked the blade from his hand as he scrambled around the table. He pulled a tag out and wrapped it around the kunai. There was a very small hole at the top of the ceiling that led outside. Aiming right, he threw it as hard as he could. To his horror, it was plucked out of the air. Horror because it was an explosive tag meant to alert his unknowingly dead guards. He watched as the ANBU held the blade in his hand, it briefly emitted a blue light before the man dropped it carelessly to the ground. Yakotashi, you have been sentenced to death by the Council of Konoha for the abduction and murder of over 100 individuals taking residence within the borders of the Land of Fire. With that said, the black blade ended the pleas of the man with a quick slash that cleanly removed his head from the rest of his body. With his mission completed, the ANBU left the mansion and took to the trees, leaving no trace of him being there other than a few dead bodies that were set aflame. Break. Hours later, the ANBU agent stood in front of his locker, stripping his armor from his body. The last thing he removed was his mask. He now stood in his street clothes. A set that hadn't changed since he was young. Black t-shirt, black pants, and black sandals with his necklace dangling in the middle of his chest. Exhaustion in his eyes and a sore body to go along with it, he shut his locker. Walking out of the locker room, the 17-year-old trudged through the gray hall down until he reached the head commander's quarters, where he was told to go when he returned. Wordlessly, he knocked on the door awaiting the command to enter. When a voice called out to him, he opened the door and slowly walked in. He took a seat in the chair opposite the man across the desk. The bold man with coal black eyes, Captain Yasha, pierced into his own blues with a false bravado that made a fair attempt at masking his sympathy. Namikaze. He began, stopping as he lost the words he was prepared to say, losing himself in the cold seas in the teen's eyes. How are you doing? He asked suddenly. The blonde had absolutely no movement, not a single blink. I am well, Captain Yasha. He replied with slight fluctuations in his tone. His lack of physical expression made it a much creepier response than it was meant to be. How are you? The captain looked at him in curiosity, not even attempting to hide the fact that he didn't believe him. I'm fine. Naruto, the reason you are here today is because a few of your comrades have expressed their worry when working with you. They say you've become more reckless than you usually are. Naruto held his motionless visage. What a strange grievance. He remarked. Well, until you have seen Inoichi-san for evaluation, I am afraid I must place you on leave. Captain Yasha said, noticing the very slight reaction of the blonde's jaw clenching up. Once you are cleared in your evaluation, you may return to service. Please turn in your mask. He finished as he began filling out documents, accenting the fact that the conversation was not up for debate. Naruto stared at the wall in thought for a few more seconds. Standing up, he pulled his mask from his back pouch and set it down onto his desk. "I bid you a good day, Captain Yasha," he said as he turned to leave, receiving only a grunt of confirmation. Break. Walking through the street, he looked up into the shower of the rain above him. Shutting his eyes to protect them from the falling droplets. Hands in his pockets and no destination in mind, he strolled along in silence. Nothing to distract himself. It was another day of feeling absolutely exhausted. Feeling undeniably drained, yet being unable to keep himself from doing something, anything that could cloud his mind. The past 3 years were the most eventful years of his life. It was expected, however, as his family was very unique. Mito and Menma becoming genin last year seemed to be where it started. They were thrown on a team with Sasuke, of course, and were handed over to Kakashi. Their rookie class became renowned among the village just a few months ago due to their performance within the Chunin exams. The event went off without a hitch and came down, surprisingly, to some extremely great matches during the semifinals. Eventually, his brother claimed victory over the entire competition. Aside from that, the kids always seemed to find themselves in some very interesting altercations. From fending off A-rank ninja to saving important individuals, the list went on and on. Life went on and on, no matter what happened, it went on and on. Through the years, Naruto has known many emotions and has experienced them himself. He's felt fear, anger, joy, content, happiness. But the one thing he lacked to a very extreme degree was love. It had been absent within his heart as he watched those around him become ensnared in it. Seeing Itachi and Izumi moving in together, watching as his younger brother slowly fell in love with the pink-haired girl he had met all those years ago. Even the budding romance of Sasuke and Mito. To Naruto, it seemed as though love was all around, yet out of his reach. For he was always around people that overshadowed him. Whether it be Itachi, Menma, or even his father who seemed to just refuse to age. He had come to terms with it a long time ago. He was jealous, not of their significant others specifically, but of the admiration they received. He was just as accomplished as anyone, yet he wasn't seen, wasn't heard, he wasn't even really noticed. It was just like before. His life was on a constant cycle of never being someone's main priority or focus. It was a selfish desire he had a few years back when there weren't any other problems to focus on. That was something he found strange. Why is it that certain things become problems due to a simple lack of conflict? When he was in his pessimistic state of mind, his problems were a lot deeper than a simple lack of affection. But, as soon as he made peace with that part of himself, small things became the things he obsessed on. It's almost as if we, as human beings, thrive on struggle more so than anything. It was a possible theory that would explain most of what we do. We search for love because love ultimately and eventually incites conflict in some way. We go to war in hopes of being alive long enough to tell our story. All for the sake of proving our own worth by making it through more traumatizing experiences than any other. As if that would somehow make you a better person than whoever it is you try and talk down on. A crazy theory he had, of course, but it was something that was definitely a possibility. Regardless, he craved that level of human interaction more so than anything. He wanted to be important to someone in some way. He wanted the villagers to admire him the way they did Itachi. He made it to ANBU at 11 years old too, so where was his congratulations? He wanted to be respected like Menma, they shared the same last name. The same resemblance to the man they associated him with, why wasn't he treated like a celebrity? Was he wrong for feeling that way? If you had asked him a few months ago, the answer would have been a resounding yes. It was completely wrong to be so selfish. The optimistic views instilled in him by his friend contorted his mind into some kind of newfound naivety that he doubted he ever had to begin with. Itachi's words to him that day were misinterpreted. To Naruto, Itachi was saying to always look towards the positive side of things instead of focusing on the negative. After a few weeks of practicing the new tactic, it became second nature. It became a part of his mentality altogether. Now he knew, Itachi wasn't saying to only focus on the positive. He was saying to look towards the positive while being aware of the negative. Naruto just cut the latter off completely, blinding himself from the world around him. But, just like the character in his new book, the world just seemed to laugh at him. His new book explained his situation fairly well. It was just a continuous series of bad events that broke him down mentally and physically. A constant stream of misfortune that seemed too chronological to be random. The world was punishing him for something he had never done. He didn't understand why or what to do because of it. The premise of the book involved the antagonist explaining how easily it is for a sane man to end up just like him. How easy it is for one to lose their mind. It was a detective novel, of course, that involved the protagonist searching high and low for the insane man, but for some reason, the antagonist stole the story. It was a dark book that discussed a lot of topics going on in today's society and the great wars of the past. Naruto had read it at least 100 times since he got it. He was reading it right now, in fact, as he memorized every line of every page. A rare find for him, he fell in love with the story. Stopping at last, he was in front of the interrogation building, which is where the psychological evaluations were also undergone. He trudged into the building, not worried about the wet state of his clothes, as he noticed the ground was wet regardless. He walked through the building until he reached the office of the head psychiatric doctor, Inoichi Yamanaka. He knocked on the door. Hearing the muffled enter from inside, he opened the door. Inoichi was finishing paperwork until he glanced up quickly to see the blonde. "Ah, Naruto," he said, finishing the document. Naruto took a seat in the chair in front of his desk, just as he had earlier that morning. He waited patiently, motionlessly. When Inoichi finally set his paperwork aside, he sat up straighter in his seat with his fingers interlocked on the desk in front of him. "I was not expecting to see you so soon." "Hello, Inoichi-san." Naruto greeted the man. Still that false fluctuation riddling his voice that just did not go well with the frozen look he displayed. Inoichi intently examined the boy, trying to see some physical indicators that would possibly interfere with the examination. He didn't have to look far, as his eyes said it all. It looked as if he hadn't slept in days. Trying to see if maybe the boy just wanted to speak of something else before he sent him on his way, Inoichi began. "So, what can I help you with?" "I was told to receive an evaluation from Inoichi-san. A few of my co-workers fear I am unfit to serve," he explained. Inoichi just watched him attentively. His eyes traveled his form, noting all of the small signs that just screamed that the kid was not right. Nodding his head slowly, Inoichi pulled his documents back to the center of his desk. "Well, I am very sorry to say, but I cannot give you a proper evaluation. You are too tired for it to be an accurate assumption. What do you say you come back next week and we'll do it then?" "I am fine, Inoichi-san," Naruto said in hopes of changing his mind. Inoichi nodded as he went back to signing documents. "I am sure. We'll find out next week." Days later, he laid in his bedroom, staring at his ceiling from the surface of his bed. The last few days melded together, becoming essentially the same day. He hadn't left his apartment since leaving Inoichi's office that night. There was nowhere to go. No one to see. He refused to walk through the streets anymore, as all that awaited him were side glances and chatter that he just knew were about him. The new pariah of the village he was. All he had left was his family's backing, which wasn't much when they were all gone. Jiraiya and Kushina took Mito and Menma on a training trip for an undetermined period of time. They had been gone for a few months now, missing the events that happened since. What was it that happened? Well, the deaths of Itachi and Izumi Uchiha, of course. It was a true tragic story that had a twisted ending. Naruto couldn't explain it to anyone because no one believed him. All they knew was that he killed them, but they didn't know the story. The true story, in a condensed version, is that Izumi Uchiha was captured by a man that had given them fair warning before. Orochimaru captured the girl while she was out on a mission with her team. When the others returned with the news, Naruto was out on a mission of his own. By the time he got back, Itachi had already gone out to look for her, abandoning his status as a Konoha ninja to do so. Naruto pleaded with his father to go and assist him, which Minato reluctantly agreed to. Naruto tracked his best friend to a somewhat hidden base along the outskirts of Kusa. When he showed up, Itachi was sitting in the middle of the floor in what seemed to be an arena of sorts. Naruto called out to him, but he didn't respond. Instantly, he knew something was happening. Itachi turned on him and attacked him out of the blue. He wouldn't explain why, he just began attacking. Naruto adamantly tried to explain that he wasn't there to take him back. He tried to explain that he was there to help, but Itachi continued attacking him with the clear intent to kill. They battled for hours on end, with Naruto trying all he could to calm his friend down. In their hour-long battle, Itachi told Naruto of the circumstances set for him by the Snake Sannin. He gave him an ultimatum: either kill Naruto Namikaze or he would kill Izumi. Naruto nearly convinced him that if they were to work together, they could kill the snake and save her. But, as luck would have it, Orochimaru showed up with a knife to the girl's throat. Itachi realized there was no chance of saving her other than doing as the man said and ending his friend's life. With a heavy heart set in stone, he continued the battle. Izumi's pleading in the background held most of his attention. The battle could have gone on forever with Naruto just dodging Itachi's attacks. Naruto at first thought it was a poor plan by the snake for the simple fact that he held no leverage over him. What drove the point home that this was supposed to be a deathmatch is the next person he brought out. A bound and gagged Mito with tears streaming down her face. Immediately, Naruto wondered how in the hell the slithery man could have gotten his hands on her. He at first tried to rush the snake to get her back. In doing so, a barrier shot up around the room, officially setting the arena as the snake kicked his feet up to watch the spectacular battle that was bound to happen. A spectacular battle it was, the two held nothing back as they fought for their hearts. Influenced by the wails of crying coming from the two girls to save them. Eventually Naruto got the upper hand and was able to kill his friend. The last thing Itachi saw before he died was Izumi's throat being slit. Naruto's soul broke completely witnessing the death of his two best friends, one of which was by his own hands. Never before had a kill made him feel so cold. The only way he could keep himself together was the thought of him saving his sister. That illusion broke as well. When the barrier dropped, Naruto looked up to the balcony to see not one, but two cynical smiles staring down at him. Orochimaru chuckled at the blonde's confusion. Naruto's teary eyes were plastered on Mito as she shared the same smile while standing next to the snake. To his shock and horror, her appearance changed into a man he read about in the bingo books. Not famously known, but an ability very impressive. 100 transformation Kaizen. Orochimaru and his associate escaped before the barrier fell. By the time it did, the heartbroken Naruto had no will or strength left to search for the duo. Instead, he carried the bodies of his friends all the way back to the village. Upon arrival, the people mourned the death of the village's famous couple. Their questions demanded answers. It was meant to be confidential, but a leak from the ANBU guarding the Hokage during Naruto's mission report began the spread of the rumor that was partially true. Within weeks, everyone knew that Naruto Namikaze killed Itachi. They just didn't know the full story. And so, he was ostracized by everyone who admired the two. Rumors spread on why he had done it, each more ridiculous than the last. Some say he was jealous of Itachi for having Izumi, so he killed Itachi to get him out of the way. When he did, Izumi didn't want him, so he killed her too. Another said he just snapped out of the blue. None of them are correct. It made it worse that they accused his father of playing favorites, acquitting him of his crime just because he was his son. That is why he was slowly sinking back into his old pessimistic views. His hope for the world slowly reduced to nothingness. His will to live, carrying the fact that he killed his best friend, dwindled completely. There was no light in this world anymore. Not for him anyways. The lack of missions was making it worse. He had been taking them one after the other just to keep his mind busy with the added benefit of avoiding the hateful gazes he received every day. The world was laughing at him. Every chance it got, it kicked the shit out of him with no mercy. What did he do? Well, he didn't know what he could do yet. It hadn't gotten to the point in which he felt he had to do something. No, he would wait it out with a sliver of his previous naive hope that it may get better sometime soon. He just had to wait. In his bed is where he would do so. Staring at the white ceiling above him, watching as it melded seamlessly through the colors of the daylight and eventually the moonlight, day after day. Sitting in his office rubbing his temples, Minato signed another document. The recent years weigh on his mind heavily. The stress of everyone everywhere begging him to do something about one thing or another was eating him alive. He didn't know who to listen to. The council was the worst as of recent. The latest tragedy of Itachi's death was at the center of most of it and consequently, so was his son. They demanded his head. Even as Minato explained that Naruto's action was within the law, as Itachi was essentially a nuke ninja, they refused to hear it. They wanted vengeance for the loss of Konoha's #1 ninja. They wanted him to pay for his crime which Minato adamantly refused. He would not kill his own son for something he would have done had he been the one to go. Minato knew for a fact he wouldn't have hesitated to end the young prodigy's life if Mito was in danger or if he thought she was. Sadly, most of the requests for a trial came from his close friend Fugaku. The entire Uchiha clan was stricken with grief and they demanded he pay for his crime. Minato actually feared the outcome of the end of all of it. There were only a few ways it was bound to end. With either Naruto getting killed or the Uchiha clan packing up and leaving Konoha for good, weakening them considerably. As a father, he wanted to protect his son as best he could, but as a cage, the village always came first. It broke his heart, but if a threat such as that were to be issued, he would have to try his best and get the sentence of death reduced to possibly prison or exile. Neither of which he wanted. With Naruto racking up mission after mission as he had been the past few weeks, he'd possibly have something to argue his case for freedom for. Maybe they would see reasoning with the village's current lack of manpower. He doubted it. The world was at a moment of stasis. Not peace, but a great lack of major conflict that could possibly incite a war. It was calm. Hearing reports from both Captain Yasha and Inoichi gave him more to worry about. Now, he was finding out his son may not be stable. That was cause for concern as well. For a man as skilled as Naruto, being unstable could mean another Orochimaru case. A madman running loose among the elemental nations. No, he wouldn't believe it. His son was fine, all he needed was some sleep. As he thought that, a ball flew in through the window, emitting a purple gas that left the ANBU in the room falling from their spots. Minato jumped to his feet with his kunai in hand, staring at the figure that jumped through the window. He had a hood covering his face as he charged the blonde Hokage. They engaged in a brief taijutsu match before another squad of ANBU burst through the door. The hooded figure kicked Minato away, gaining some distance before charging towards the window. He threw an explosive tag at the roof above before jumping out. When he did, he peeked back inside at the blonde Hokage who was surprised by the face beneath the cloak. It was his own son. Unfortunately, the ANBU within the room saw as well and gave the order to others that Naruto Namikaze has attacked the Hokage. With that, they pushed their way through the falling debris, intent on finding the blonde teen and arresting him. Minato was still shell-shocked at the turn of events. There was no covering this one up. He just couldn't believe Naruto would attack him so carelessly. He could have easily caught him just then, but his shock wouldn't let him move. He couldn't understand what had happened. Or maybe he could, but he just refused to believe it. Naruto remained staring at his ceiling, as he had done all day, when he suddenly heard someone quietly enter his home. As a trained ANBU operative, he heard it clearly and drew a kunai, readying it for whatever fool tried to attack him. He could hear multiple things in his house shifting or moving with someone's influence. Waiting around the corner, completely calm, he waited as whoever came rushing in. When they did, he ended their life with no hesitation until he saw that it was one of his own ANBU agents. A guy he knew, more specifically. Instantly, he dropped the kunai in his hands and fell to the ground, spewing out a string of no's in urgency. No, 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 hey. Hey. He said, putting pressure on the slash in his neck, trying to stop the blood from flowing out. His hand glowed green with medical chakra, but before he could heal the injury, he was tackled to the ground by a group of other ANBU agents. With his face pressed against the floor, he looked down to the end of the hall and perched in the window, staring back at him, was himself. His eyes grew considerably with the smirk he was given before the visage changed into some random civilian and jumped away. The knee pushed his face down, muffling his cries to go after the real perp. He struggled more and more, just to get to a position where he could at least talk, but as soon as he did, the ANBU on his back delivered a chop to the back of his neck, putting him to sleep. His headband was removed from around his neck. 2 months later, his body slumped over on his knees in the middle of the room filled with people who hated him, and his father's saddened gaze upon him. Naruto stared blankly at the ground beneath his knees. The room sat in silence awaiting the verdict they had all arrived to at long last. For the past 2 months, Naruto was being held in the ANBU prison as he made his own case to defend himself when he was called before the council. He explained every assumption he arrived at, even re-explaining the situation involving Itachi's death. The council was split in their thinking. Most of the civilians were undeterred by his story. But the clan heads and higher-ups seemingly understood, if even a little. Understanding and forgiving were different things as explained by Fugaku. When he explained what he believed happened the night he was being charged for, he told them of seeing 100 transformation Ks and fleeing the scene while he was being detained. The one thing he couldn't explain was the man's motive. The only possible answer he had was that the man was possibly intent on ruining his life. The council would not accept such a runaround excuse, so his only possible explanation was seen as unreliable. Now, they just waited for the inevitable sentencing. Minato stood to his feet, no attempt at masking the pain of his duty. Naruto Namikaze. For the crime of attempted murder against your cage. And the murder of a fellow Konoha shinobi. You have been sentenced to life in prison. His voice grew softer and softer as he spoke. Even when all was said and done, the room remained completely silent. I am so sorry, son. The only sound now was the clanking of Naruto's shackles as he was being hauled off by 2 of the ANBU guards. This time, to the real prison. 1 month later. 1 month. One hellish month that fell into a new cycle that was far less than favorable. It couldn't have been helped however, as the prison was run by his biggest fans, the Uchiha clan. With the testament of what happened the day of Itachi's death directly to Fugaku's face, he had hoped it would be enough to at least make peace, but the past few weeks told him otherwise. His first night there was the loneliest he had ever been. He wasn't placed with the other prisoners immediately. Instead, he was taken to one of the abandoned divisions in the lower levels. It was there that the guards felt he needed to be taught a lesson. Sure, he could have fought back and probably killed them, but he figured there was no point. It would do him no good anyways. They beat him severely for the first few days, taking turns venting their frustrations out and getting revenge for their fallen clan prodigy. His daily torture was only accented by the lack of proper treatment and bare essentials. He was given one very unfavorable meal a day, water twice a day and a shower that could not be used. That was his cycle for the time being. When the guards had finished having their fun with the blonde, he was at last moved up to the regular prison levels. His first cellmate was a man who had a grudge against his father for his sentencing, as did more than a few others. In other words, after Naruto endured the beatings from the guards, he had thought they would stop. Of course, life had more jokes for him. His permanent fate of enduring more beating being one of them. They had their fun with him whenever they felt as though they wanted to hit something, and when staring at a wall was your main activity, you always wanted to hit something. The guards always turned a blind eye to the events, whether they be in the courtyard, the cafeteria, or the hallway. They would always stand aside and watch until his attacker got tired before bringing back order. For those who really hated him, they gave the prisoners the lower floor for the purpose of having fun for as long as they wished. It was down there that they attempted to kill him. It was down there that Naruto Namikaze finally lost it. While down there, one of the attackers got the idea to drown him in the water from the shower, knowing full well the issue that made the lower levels inaccessible. There was a reason the lower levels were no longer used. They ran on the same pipelines that were used by the old lab of the Snake Sannin. Pipes that he used to dump his toxic chemicals before he fled. That day, there were hundreds of prisoners that died because of it. Sadly for Naruto, that wasn't the case for him. His Uzumaki blood seemed to allow him to fend off the internal effects it caused. But, it did well in changing his appearance. Not to an extreme level, but it did dye the hair on his body blood red. In a stroke of irony, he looked as though he were born with the color just as his mother and sister. It was just another part in the series of bad events, this one finally broke him. All the men stood around his broken form, watching him throw the blackened liquid off his body, they laughed. Thinking back to his favorite book that he was no longer able to read, he realized something. The book was completely right. Everything it said made perfect sense. The world around him was laughing at him. It was kicking dirt in his face and laughing its ass off. Everyone around him was intent on assisting. They were quick to notice him when he did something bad, but when he tried to play the hero and just be a morally correct person, he was forgotten about. No matter what he did, he was overlooked as if he belonged in non-existence. It was at that moment, as he kneeled on the floor with his skin burning and black liquid still pouring out of his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. He pushed his hands through his newly red hair, still covered in the murky black liquid, holding his hair to his head. And he laughed. He cackled like a man possessed, freezing the surrounding men almost instantly. They watched him laugh in absolute silence. One of them, who felt brave enough from kicking his ass all day, stepped up with the plan of delivering another kick to his face. When his leg came within range, Naruto grabbed his ankle in an iron grip, clamping down harder and harder. He was no longer laughing. With a violent jerk of his wrist, he broke the man's leg. The man screaming is all that broke the silence of the barren prison chamber. The 4 remaining men got into fighting stances, seeing that he was finally planning on fighting back. Only one of them was smiling as he was an ANBU agent himself and felt that he could take him. The others weren't so sure, 2 of them barely reaching the rank of Chunin and one of them barely making Genin. Naruto stood up with his back to the group, not affected in the slightest by the man screaming bloody murder next to him, trying to crawl away. He was still casually wiping the black water off his body. Pulling a strand of hair down, he examined how blood red it was. Huh. He admired it. That is uncanny. Ha 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 ha. He said with a gassed-out chuckle that did little to settle their nerves. The former ANBU commander was tired of the anticipation. Now was his best chance to attack. He leaped forward intent on delivering a kick to his back. Naruto sidestepped the attack and grabbed the off-balanced man in a chokehold. Without a moment's hesitation, he snapped his neck with a nauseating cracking sound. When he dropped the body to the ground, the other 2 lost faith in their chances of defeating him. Their only chance was to make a run for the door to get the attention of a guard. When they took off running, Naruto slowly turned around and began walking their way. Passing by the whimpering man with the freshly broken leg, he stepped on his injured appendage, inciting another hell-curdling scream from him. Don't go too far now. I'll be right back. Ha 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 ha. The 2 men made it to the metal door and began beating on it repeatedly, begging for someone to open the door. The guard that was usually at the top of the stairs wasn't there this time. Turning around, they saw the red-haired teen, still partially covered in the black water, casually strolling their way. In urgency, they began hitting it harder and harder, trying to break the door down. Naruto strolled towards the 2 in apparent amusement. A small grin plastered on his lips and an intense look in his eyes. Watching the 2 men fight for their lives was amusing him in some sick way. Even more so when they turned to face him. Resolved in their eyes and a will to live, they charged, one after the other, and died in the same order. But those 2 handled, he casually walked back to the last man standing. Well, crawling. The man was still on the floor with his head tucked against his forearms and his body trembling. Naruto grabbed the man by his broken leg and swung him around until his body crashed into one of the cell doors. His fit of screaming turned up to another level completely. Naruto squatted down to gaze into his eyes. In doing so, the man tried to throw a swing at him. Naruto caught his fist with his left hand and with his right, jabbed him in the bicep. When that appendage dropped lifeless, the man pulled the shank he was hiding up his left sleeve and slashed at him. Naruto easily disarmed him, disabling that arm as well. The man regretted his actions almost immediately as he watched a blonde twirl it in his hands, examining its quality. Huh. You brought me a toy. He said, taking the blade in his hand. When he suddenly stopped, the man looked him in the eye with more fear than he was expecting. Naruto's visage became softer, almost sincere. What's wrong? You were laughing at me just a moment ago. He said. You don't look good with a frown. Let me fix that. Ha 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 ha. Grabbing the man by his hair, he stuck the blade in his mouth and gave him a partial Glasgow smile. There, now even in your grave, you'll be smiling. With that, he slit his throat and watched the blood pour out in a steady stream. Then, he sat there in the middle of his heinous crime and waited patiently for the guards to return to 5 dead prisoners and a new man, laughing at the ironic turn of events. Marking this day as the day he finally lost his mind and lost himself. The day he simply laughed back. There was no longer a Naruto Namikaze. That boy was gone. Now, all that remained was no one. Chapter 5 1 years later, on the 3rd floor of the Konoha maximum security prison, 3 men struggled down the hall passing cage after cage of men who are in their rightful place within the establishment. One a skinny brown-haired man dressed in his orange jumpsuit, the other 2 Uchiha guards pushing him along, struggling the whole way. The prisoner looked absolutely terrified, begging the guards desperately to not force him to go wherever they were taking him. He did everything he could to prevent his movement. Dropping down to the ground, pushing his feet against the rails and indentations of the walls on the way by. The men within their cells that watched him pass by chuckled and threw out words of false encouragement that only increased his fear. "Oh come on. Please." He yelled, trying his hardest to push back against the 2 men. "Kami. Please. I beg you." His pleas fell on deaf ears as they dragged him away, towards the very last cell that had 3 empty cells next to it. The man even begged to be put into one of those, but they had their orders and stuck to them, throwing him into the cell and shutting him in. The man quickly got to his feet and ran for the cage, trying to throw it open before the guard locked it. "No. Please," he said, grabbing onto the bars as they walked away. Soon, he was left there, left to hear nothing but the chatter of the other prisoners in the distance. He refused to turn around as fear racked his entire body. From behind him, he could hear tapping. Following the advice given to him before he was brought in, he tried not to make a single sound. The shaking of his lip was allowing the smallest of whimpers to escape his mouth. That's what he focused on for the time being. His heart skipped a beat when he heard a whistle that was clearly intended to get his attention. His mind was ripping itself in half trying to weigh his odds. If he didn't turn around, he'd be disrespecting him, but if he did, well, they had only heard stories. Figuring he'd have to face his fears at some point, he turned around timidly. The cell had the basic layout the rest of them did, with a bunk bed off to the right side, a toilet sitting in the back left corner, a sink against the back wall, and a small table and chairs bolted to the floor in the middle. In the seat facing him, his new red-headed cellmate sat, holding a deck of cards that he tapped on the table portentously in rhythms of 3. A very intense look in his eye that was directed solely at the skinny man standing in front of him. Stalking him as if he were the most interesting thing to him at that moment. "Hello," he called out slowly. "Looks like we're cellmates now." The man tried his hardest to clench his trembling lip as tight as he could. His hands were held protectively against his chest, and his eyes refused to meet the steely gaze of the redhead. Forcing himself to reply, he whispered out. "Seem like it." His tone was riddled with so much fear, he berated himself for even trying. The redhead smiled at him. "Hey, would you like to be my friend?" The council chamber was once again filled to the brim with people that at this point were becoming very annoyed with the case they were discussing, the case of the sentencing of Naruto Namikaze. His enraged family brought the case up every month since their return with new arguments and questions. Minato continued bringing the case to the floor as it was his decision which trials they discussed each time they got together. With their society being a militaristic dictatorship, they could not speak out against his ruling, excluding special cases such as a shinobi's imprisonment, which was the current issue. Sitting in the middle of the room along a table, directly in front of the main council members, was Kushina, Menma, and Mito along with Jiraiya. All there to plead the case or give a testament. "All I'm saying is that it doesn't make sense," Kushina said, pulling out cards that she had written facts about the case on. "I mean, Naruto claimed it was the working of 100 transformation Kaizen that posed as him. So, why was he not searched for when you received this information?" Danzo Shimura was heading the meeting with the agreement of Minato, who understood the case was too personal for him to rule favorably. That information wasn't received until the morning after the attack. By that time, he would have been nearing the outskirts of the Land of Fire. "So you just decided not to even entertain the idea that he could have been telling the truth?" she asked incredulously. "Don't be foolish, of course we did. Namikaze's claim for a possible motive was too ridiculous to be taken," he replied. At this point, Jiraiya stood up. "I agree, but I'd argue the kid was too emotionally distressed to give an accurate motive." "So you're saying you have one?" asked Homura from his side. "Actually I do. You see, the death of Itachi Uchiha is linked to this. Kaizen posed as his sister to get him to fight Itachi. He was working with Orochimaru at the time." He let that ring in the air for a few moments. Danzo rushed him to elaborate. "What is your point, Jiraiya?" "It's Orochimaru," Jiraiya yelled out as if the case was completely obvious. "I mean, come on. Do you not know his motives for what he does? And what would that motive be?" Fugaku asked from his spot. "He wants him." He wants to make him a monster because he saw his potential. He answered. Danzo seemed completely unconvinced. We are not here to base motives off of speculation. Regardless if we accept your ridiculous guess of intention, Naruto Namikaze has solidified his position within prison. He has killed an active Konoha shinobi and 28 men while incarcerated including 3 guards. We argue self-defense. Kushina replied instantly. Heiei-sen was within Naruto's residency unlawfully, to Naruto's knowledge, and as a shinobi, he was within his rights to kill all of them. He even expressed the fact that he killed him by mistake. Before Danzo could argue his point, she continued. Naruto himself was found beaten and chemically tortured by the guards who discovered the scene. That means nothing. Danzo replied. Inoichi-san, would you please explain to us your last psychological evaluation with the prisoner in question? He said, directing everyone's attention to the man. Inoichi shifted in his seat a little, feeling uneasy about incriminating the son of his friends. My evaluation with Naruto Namikaze was quite informative. He said, coughing into his hand. He was very unhinged, if I were to describe it. His topics bounced around sporadically. His personality shifted completely from when I had last spoken to him. Do not beat around the bush, Inoichi. Danzo demanded. Tell them what you told me. They need to hear it. Inoichi cursed the man. He looked down into the eyes of the man's family in sympathy. Naruto Namikaze showed heavy signs of psychopathy. When we talked, he spoke of his intentions of what he wished to do if he were ever released. Describing things along the lines of mass murder and inciting wars. Kushina and the others couldn't believe it. It wasn't true. What do you mean by signs of psychopathy? Jiraiya asked. Well, when evaluating someone, we begin with basic questions used to determine their emotional state. From their answers, it is decided if they are in need of the test. Naruto's answers were completely unrelated to the questions being asked. So, I began to ask him more hypothetical questions to see how he reacted to them. His answers were circuitous to say the least. Inoichi explained. So, you marked him insane because he answered your questions indirectly? Jiraiya asked in a deadpan tone. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. He said. The questions are used to get them ticking. Make them feel as though they're not in control. When they feel as though they are losing it, they will either react violently or use some other motive to return it to their favor. Naruto is quite slick with his words. He led me into a conversation that left himself explaining what he was talking about as I did not understand. In other words, he shifted the conversation towards a subject only he knew about, making himself the only person with words on the subject, putting himself in control. That doesn't prove anything. Mito yelled out, finally joining the conversation. Naruto Nai is just smart. He is indeed. Inoichi continued. Which is why he knew he could shift the conversation towards his own favor. Aside from the mental battle we had, his physical tendencies were unbalanced as well. What? Did he shake his leg too fast? Jiraiya jokes. Inoichi brushed off the comment and continued on. No, it was more subtle things. For one, he only blinked once. The family just stared at him incredulously, visually asking if he were serious. Our conversation was 2 hours long. He clarified. Look, Kushina, I am terribly sorry for what is happening to your family at the moment, but in my opinion, I have never seen a look like the one Naruto has in his eyes. He's not the same boy he was when you left. If you continue in your journey to get him released, and you succeed, I fear for us all. Kushina's expression was downtrodden. She stared at the table beneath her hands thinking over his words. No words of reply to the statement. He was trying to demonize her son. What could she say? There is no need to fear Inoichi. Danzo said, looking down on the group in the center of the room. Naruto Namikaze will never leave that prison. Actually, he will. Said Fugaku, surprising everyone. They all looked at him in questioning. Was he siding with Kushina? Naruto has become too dangerous to keep within the prison. He is responsible for talking 7 of his previous cellmates and neighboring inmates into committing suicide. It has gotten to the point in which we have had to clear out 6 of the cells next to his to prevent it from happening further. With the overcrowding state the prison is in currently, you can see how that is a problem. In our need to place more than a few inmates in solitary confinement, we have come to the point of threatening to move them to his cell to keep them in line. Since the death of one of the guards however, the others are afraid to go near him. So where else do you propose we put him? Minato asked, finally joining the conversation. Fugaku thought it over. Well, if we decide he is a lost cause, he can be sent to Hazuki Castle. He said, receiving a shake of Minato's head. Or, he could be moved to the asylum in the care of Inoichi. It's a less stressful environment with the same containment tactics. He suggested. All the cells are isolated and he'd receive the proper treatment he needs. Minato looked down and thought. It was a lot better than prison, but if Naruto were a danger to the prisoners, then would it be wise to stick him in a place where they were granted virtually more freedom? I will leave the decision up to Inoichi. He said, looking over to the man. Inoichi looked down and thought. I have a haunting feeling that I should probably refuse, but I suppose it would be best. He nodded his head. Danzo interrupted. For it to be a possibility, there must be restrictions as he is still imprisoned. He said. Minato nodded begrudgingly as he had given him authority over the case. There will be no interaction between Namikaze and the other occupants. He will not be allowed recreational time as he is not a patient, he is a prisoner. Might I suggest a 2-hour psychological session as well? Total isolation could cause more harm and aggression than is recommended for someone of Naruto's skills. Inoichi said. The 2-hour session is approved. If at all possible, get him mentally sane enough to be moved back to the prison. Regarding his skills, they will not be an issue, he has a complex seal blocking off his chakra made for prisoner containment by the Nidaime himself. It has stood strong for years. Danzo said. Inoichi nodded, blowing out a sigh with clear worry riddling his tone. Hold on. Fugaku said. Who would you have to undergo his evaluations? Well, I have a staff full of capable psychologists, most of which were trained by me personally. They are all highly capable. He answered. Fugaku gave him a look that did nothing to settle his nerves. I'd advise putting only your best. Preferably yourself. He said, giving no further information. Finally tired of holding their tongues, Kushina spoke up. Hang on, don't we get a say in this? She asked. I am afraid not. Danzo said. Your argument today was pushing for your son's release. That is not and will not ever happen. Furthermore, Naruto Namikaze will have no visitors other than those granted special clearance as he is still a prisoner of capital offense. He will have the same lack of laws he would have had within the prison. He said with finality that enraged the Redeed beyond belief. That is the final result of this Hokage-sama meeting. Minato stared at the top edge of his podium with a disappointed look as well. He was of course unsatisfied with the verdict but was already plotting strong points for the next argument that was most likely going to take place next month. He was the Hokage, so he decided on whatever case he chose no matter how many times he chose to do so. If that is all, everyone is dismissed. He said, standing up himself. Kushina was packing the papers and various forms she brought back into the folder, glaring at Danzo who looked right back at her apathetically. This isn't over. She warned him as her and the others headed towards the exit. Danzo just snorted at her remark. I'm sure. 3 hours later, Namikaze's house was subdued in utter silence. Mito, Menma, Jiraiya and Kakashi sat around the table listening to the aggressive cooking taking place in the kitchen. Mito and Menma still silently arguing as to not disturb the others stuck in the thought of their defeat. Jiraiya was thinking of things they could use for the next case but was drawing complete blanks. Everything he came up with somehow found a way to counter itself or was seen as invalid due to some of the things already discussed. This was extremely important to him and the others could tell. Although they would like to believe it was all for Naruto, it wasn't. He loved the boy, but this was also a chance to finally get Konoha to actively search for and apprehend his old teammate or even kill. He's known Orochimaru for years and if he's learned one thing, it's that he is a very patient person. No matter how long he had to wait, he would see his plans come to fruition, and with a mind like his, Jiraiya feared what that could mean. Minato walked into the silence, knowing full well he was expecting it. He hung his cloak up and made his way through the dining room, greeting everyone on the way by. He entered the kitchen to see Kushina chopping vegetables so aggressively that it was cutting into the wood of the cutting board. He walked up next to her, getting her attention. We made progress. Chopping even harder, she replied instantly. Heh, progress, she mocked. What fucking progress? We got him sent to a house full of wackos and sick people. How great. That's not what I meant. Minato said, looking down in thought. We've gotten the backing of a few more of the clan heads. What good is that now that you put that one-eyed fucker in charge of everything? She asked him to spit out the term she used for Danzo with venom. Minato rubbed his face. Look, I had to. Shikaku thought it would be a good idea. He said a few of the clan heads were siding against us because they thought I was playing favorites. So? I bet if it were one of their kids they'd do the same. Fucking thing. She said louder, splitting the cutting board in half. Minato walked up and gently pulled the knife from her hand. Calm down, calm down. Look, it's not over. We'll bring the case back up next month and we will keep bringing it up until we have him back. He said, rubbing her arms to soothe her stress. We will get him back. I promise. Kushina's body just slumped against his, trying her hardest to keep faith in his words. After a year of doing this, it felt like she couldn't believe him and with Inoichi's statement, she knew the situation got a lot harder. 3 days later, 4 armed Uchiha guards as well as Fugaku himself walked down the halls of the prison towards the last cell. Walking past the cells of men sitting in a shocked silence the further they went. One of them holding a load of equipment that jingled with every step. Finally making it to the last cell, they peered inside to see a sight that was disturbing. Naruto sat in the chair on the opposite side of the table facing them, and his cellmate was beating his head on the wall. Blood splatter dripped down the wall in front of him. "Kario, get him and take him to the infirmary," Fugaku said as they opened the cell. Naruto stared at Fugaku in amusement. "Ah, Fugaku-sama. It's been a while," he said with a small smile resting on his lips. His eyes barreled into the Uchiha leaders with such intensity it was unsettling. "What is the reason for this visit?" he asked him casually. Fugaku and the others stepped into the cell, the one with the equipment timidly walked around the table and got behind the Redeed, pulling him to his feet. "You are being moved to the asylum as you have become too dangerous to remain in this prison," Fugaku explained. "Well there, you will have the same lack of rights you have here." He repeated the words of Danzo. He threw him a set of white clothes to further accent that this was no joke. "You think I'm crazy?" he said in amusement, holding the clothes in his hands. Fugaku crossed his arms, meeting the intense gaze without fear. "What I think is of no importance. An expert has deemed you a certified psychopath. Put him on," he demanded. Naruto only smiled at him. "I prefer oranges," he started casually. "I don't care," he replied with his stoic look still in place. Naruto chuckled and removed his clothes and slipped into the white uniform. When he finished, his arms were bound tightly behind his back and his feet were shackled together. "An expert, huh? So, Inoichi-san believes I am crazy." He started with a smile. Before he could say anything else, a muzzle was placed over his mouth so that he could not speak. "Aside from that, your actions within my facility have been a hindrance to my staff and the functioning of the prison. You will be moved to the asylum where you will have no contact with the patients and no recreational time. In addition, you will attend a 2-hour-long session with a psychologist every day," he informed him. He couldn't see it, but he just knew the Redeed was smiling. The two Uchiha guards on either side grabbed onto his elbows and began ushering him out the cell and down the hall. On the way, his casual gaze peered into the cells of the men still frozen in silence as they watched the psychopath being led down the hall, all of them noticing the white getup and finding it fitting. Fugaku was amazed by how much fear he was able to instill in the men of their horrible nature. Naruto was like a monster to these monsters, and it only ensured him that he should never be allowed to roam free. Pushing him out the front door of the prison, the 3 Uchiha police force members marched him through the woods that led to the psychiatric ward that was about a mile through the backwoods of the village. Naruto didn't struggle in the slightest. He played visual mind games with the ward staff that were heading back to the village in the opposite direction, giving them playful gazes and eye smiles that were completely unsettling. Finally arriving at the asylum, Inoichi was already waiting at the door with 2 of his biggest staff members ready to take over from there. Naruto gave the blonde man an amused look from behind his muzzle. His concentrated gaze bored into his skull with unknown intentions. The Uchiha guards handed off the prisoner to the 2 workers as Fugaku greeted Inoichi. Shaking the timid man's hand, he gave his parting words. "Best of luck, Inoichi," he said slowly. Inoichi exhaled and nodded his head at the man as he and his clansmen walked away. Inoichi took the lead, walking the 2 guards and his new patient prisoner along with him. Naruto looked around at the new scenery of all white while he was being pushed along. It was a new experience in contrast to the usual grey walls he was used to. A blinding one at that. They passed hallway after hallway, passing many rooms and offices. Making it to the stairs, they climbed up 3 flights before finally stepping back into a hall. In the distance, Naruto could hear chatter. As he was pushed along, they passed by what he assumed was the recreational center, as there were a bunch of white-clothed patients doing various tasks inconsistent to what it looked like they would be doing. Like the 2 men sitting at the chessboard staring off into space or asleep. He was pushed along until he could no longer see them. After that, it was more white halls with patients being led down the hall or back into their rooms. He received looks of fear from more than a few of the ward employees on the way, which was familiar of course. Finally, at the very end of the hall was a single room, far away from the others, marked with his name. Inoichi pulled out his keys and unlocked the metal door. They walked the blonde in and halted him in the middle of the room. Inoichi pulled out a needle and flicked it twice. He stuck it in Naruto's neck and his body began to slump forward. The 2 guards grabbed hold of him and carried him towards the pad in the corner, laying him down. Inoichi pulled out the keys Fugaku gave him and removed the cuffs and shackles from the Redeed. When he finished that, another of his employees brought in a straitjacket that they secured tightly on Naruto's form. "Will that be all, Dr. Yamanaka?" asked one of the workers standing next to him as he looked down at Naruto. With a sigh and a nod, he turned around. "Yes, that is all. Return to your tasks," he said, ushering them out before stepping out himself and locking the metal door. It always pained him to see someone he's known since they were children end up in this place. It happened all too often for his liking. The next day, sitting in a room with metal chairs and a metal table, all bolted to the floor, Naruto stared up into the dangling light above. His straitjacket was secured with chains connected to the floor. He was sat down a few hours earlier by two of the workers and was told to wait for his session to begin. Eventually, the door opened up and Inoichi walked in with a vanilla folder in his hand and a cup of coffee tucked in his elbow to free his mother to shut the door. He strolled over casually, not even looking Naruto's way yet. Sitting down, he sat his stuff down and looked towards the blonde. Naruto's intense gaze was already on him with a small smile tugging at his lips. Inoichi ignored the look and pulled a notepad and a pen from his pocket. "Good morning, Naruto. I will be handling your psychological sessions for the time being. I would like to start out by asking you some simple questions." "I believe we have already done this, Inoichi-san," Naruto said, amusement in his voice. "Don't tell me you have to reevaluate me now." Inoichi shook his head. "These are different questions," he said, flipping a few pages. Naruto waited patiently with his smile fading in and out. "Now, do you know what you are doing here?" "Well, an expert," he said with a hint of amusement, "has deemed me clinically insane." Inoichi didn't react to the statement. "It's a little more complicated than that," he said. "Naruto, I'm not here to treat you like a criminal. Okay, I've been on your side since before your trial." Naruto just nodded mockingly. "I want to help you," he said seriously. Naruto looked up and thought. "Ugh, if only I could believe you," he said in false exasperation. "And why can't you?" Naruto shifted in his seat, giving Inoichi a confused look and a smile. "Well, you told me not to," he said wittily. Inoichi raised an eyebrow at the statement. He hadn't said anything like that. Seeing his confusion, Naruto rolled his eyes in comical annoyance. "Come on, I know it only made it to paperback, but still." Inoichi was still as confused as possible. This was an example of what he meant in the trial when he said Naruto's topics would bounce around sporadically. Now it seemed as if he were on a completely different subject altogether. Well, that's what he thought until Naruto explained further. The biggest sin of a man at war is his undoubted belief in the enemy's words. It is a psychosomatic disadvantage of a human being who has seen enough tragedy to have faith in the things he hears that promise an end. If he is told of a possible end to war, regardless of where the information comes from, he will take it without question. A shinobi's duty is to resist such an urge. Inoichi Yamanaka, The Psychology of War. Naruto said. Inoichi's eyes widened ever so slightly when he realized what he was talking about. "You've read my book," he stated in surprise. Surprise because it was never very popular to those who weren't studying psychology. It was far from being a bestseller. "I did," Naruto said, nodding his head. "A true masterpiece it was." Inoichi raised an eyebrow, not expecting a compliment. "Well, thank you. But I don't believe that applies to this situation. We're not at war, aren't we?" Naruto responded immediately. "Call it what you will, but this is war. Two sides facing off in a battle to gain the upper hand or maintain it. That is the goal here, right?" he asked, upholding that same unsettling eye contact. "I mean, your expert evaluation of me is that I am a psychopath. Someone who loves being in control," he mocked. Inoichi was starting to feel a bit anxious as he just got that sickening feeling that Naruto was more than a few steps ahead of him. His many years of doing this, however, gave nothing away, and he met the Redeed's eye contact with a stoic look that was unshaken. Coughing into his hand, he replied. "Yes, but I am not here to compete with you." "Oh, but you are. You are here for just that reason. You see, this little game of ours has the ultimate objective of control. We're in your facility. You control all things within. Patients, workers, the lights and whatnot." Naruto rhetorically asked him, receiving a nod of confirmation. "Yeah, well, as hard as you may try and hide it, I can tell I threaten you." Inoichi chuckled a bit as a way to demean Naruto's statement when in truth he wasn't feeling too confident. "No, I do," he accented calmly. Inoichi sat back in his seat with a forced grin on his face. "And how is that?" he asked him. Naruto blinked in thought. "Well, you are no match for me physically, and you know that. All those years of war and you couldn't beat me if you left me in this straitjacket. You know this, so you have to come up with some other method of beating me. You want to assert your dominance by displaying your prowess in something that only a handful of men have been able to best you at, mental prowess." Inoichi's full smirk of confidence unintentionally dropped by the end of Naruto's rant. "But now you're starting to truly worry. Because I'm beating you at that as well. Is that not what war is about? Gaining the tactical advantage over your enemy in all aspects of the fight. As I am sure you're aware, you are not the first man to depict war from a mental standpoint," he asked again rhetorically. "Of course," Inoichi said, nodding. "Do you know about Wakata-Fuji?" Naruto asked. Inoichi wanted to say yes, but he knew the types of quarters you could be backed into when lying to someone as intelligent as Naruto, so instead he shook his head. Naruto nodded and continued. "Well, he was a general of Kurigakure during the Second Great Shinobi War. He wrote a book titled, It's a Mind Game. What the book was about was basically the mental strain put on the mind of a man at war, much like yours." In his depiction, he explained it as being a process, a slow process, much like working on a patient. He said with a shrug. Inoichi was listening intently, actually interested in what he was saying. When war begins. The first step is asserting your dominance, making the opposing side more timid to attack. That was your intention when coming here today. You may not have known it, but it was. It is what you would call a tactless objective. It was planned out without even truly thinking about it. It's actually a fairly blatant example of the good guy bad guy complex really. He said with a chuckle. How is that exactly? Inoichi asked in reply. Wow. Naruto said smiling as he shook his head. You really don't see it. Well, you woke up this morning. Thinking about this moment. In anticipation, your mind simplified the situation. There are two men here, one good one bad. He nodded his way as if he were talking to a child. In your mind, you went over various scenarios and mentally planned out how you wanted it to go. You expected me to be much more aggressive than I am from the stories you've heard, or else you wouldn't have seen it fit to secure me with chains. He said leaning forward stretching out the metal links on his back. In doing so, you made a plan to make it clear to me who was in charge here. You're drawing this assumption from thin air. Inoichi said portentously. Oh, but I'm not. Naruto said almost as if he were singing. You see, from the very first question, you meant to demean my intelligence, expecting me to have a very rudimentary understanding of why I'm here. He mocked. Which I did. Your response was it's a little more complicated than that. Clear signifier. He said casually nodding his own head. Then you layer a sheet of emotional manipulation over top of it to make it seem as if you were on my side. A clever tactic that I am sure has worked on a ton of patients. Naruto was praised. But, even still. It's too elementary for a mental war of this level, and you know what they say about war. You never know who's winning until the end. He said with a smile. Do you think you're winning? Inoichi asked. Naruto only chuckled ominously. Oh ho ho, it is far from the end. He replied leaning back in his seat. Inoichi just stared at him, seeing him in a new light. From their last conversation, he was convinced Naruto was psychologically unhinged, but after this talk, he was getting a different vibe. He wasn't unhinged at all, psychotic yes, but unhinged. Not so much. For some reason, that just made things a lot worse. 4 years later, rubbing his temples, Minato signed another document, barely reading its content. His old age was starting to wear him down after all these years. Adding the drama of the constant arguments he was involved in, he was more than exhausted. 4 years was all it took to both amaze him and disappoint him all at the same time. Amazement coming from his two youngest children as they climbed the ranks bit by bit, owning up to their titles and respect within the village. They turned 18 a few months ago, which really made him realize how fast time was going by. It was like he blinked and they were fully grown and moving on with their lives. Years of fighting for their brother's freedom alongside their mother had eaten up the remainder of their youth. Oh yes, Naruto was still locked within the asylum, now with no possible way of getting out. The bitter pill that they all had to swallow. 2 years ago, they were just nearing a breaking point in which the council members were considering releasing the blonde, but with the world working against them, the veteran psychologist Inoichi, entrusted with Naruto's sessions in his absence, committed suicide within his home after a conversation with him. The man's suicide note expressed in extreme urgency that Naruto was the most insane man he had ever worked on, and if he were to ever be released, it would only cause more destruction than it was worth. That was all it took for the members of the council to put their foot down at the wife of the Hokage and explain to her that under no circumstances was he ever going to be released, as he was too dangerous to ever step foot in civilized society. The entire Namikaze family was of course unhappy with the news, but the one who took it the hardest was Kushina. Mainly due to the events that happened after the council gave her that ultimatum. She agreed she would not bring the trial up again if she got to see him one last time. They agreed to her request and she went the next morning. When she got there and signed in, giddy and heartbroken about seeing her son for the first time in years, but the last time forever. What broke her heart completely was when Inoichi told her he wasn't taking visitors. When she demanded that it was an order from the council to let her see him, Inoichi clarified he knew as he was there too. Restating his previous statement, he told her Naruto refused to see her. Kushina at that moment knew without a doubt she was a failure as a mother. She linked his reasoning to the neglect they put him through all those years ago. Convincing herself that he was just suppressing his emotions all along and that he truly hated them. She spiraled into a very deep depression that consumed her life for over a year. It was only the previous year that she was finally able to pull herself back up and stand on her own 2 feet, in part due to their growing family. Menma, now an ANBU operative, realized somewhere along the line how precious life was. After losing people close to him, he understood how short it could be, so he and his girlfriend, Sakura Haruno, decided that they wanted to be together forever, for as long as that forever was at least. So, they married at the age of 17. It was the needed bit of joy that was finally able to pull Kushina out of her rut even just a little. Then even further with the news of her pregnancy. Adding to that, the official relationship of Mito Namikaze and Sasuke Uchiha brought her joy as well. She couldn't be involved in one of her children's lives, but she still had two that were moving on and doing wonderful things. Her heart stung every time she thought of Naruto, but she knew he was as good as gone now, and she had no one to blame but herself. But, if she dwelled on the past, then she'd miss out on the present and she'd be blind to the future. Minato was glad to see his wife back to her old self at last. He felt happy to see a sliver of things looking up for them after 4 long years. His heart still aches every day with the thought of his oldest son though. As a father, he felt that he failed him. Had he been there to guide Naruto from the beginning, maybe his progress would have been a bit slower, but he would have had the chance to be a kid. If that happened, maybe he never would have had that run-in with the Snake Sannin, and maybe they'd still be a perfect family. At this point, he was living off of those so-called what-if fantasies. Dreaming of them as hard as he could as if that would be enough to fix his wrongdoings. Unlike Kushina, Minato was much better at hiding his pain. Of course, he had continuous piles of work to distract him as well. But the issue with that is that, when you appear strong, no one tries to help you. No one cared to ask him how he felt about losing a son. During Naruto's trials, he was told he could have no say during the actual session, as his word carried too much weight. Minato, more than once, had the thought of saying fuck it and just demanding his release, but as a Hokage in times of peace, he knew doing that would result in problems for the village. When most of the clan heads and the entire civilian council were against Naruto's freedom, he knew their response would have been as drastic as his thought of the Uchiha clan packing their things and leaving the village. He knew it would cripple the village immensely. As a father, he didn't care, but as a Kage, he had to. He had the rest of his family to think about as well. Konoha's enemies would jump at the opportunity to destroy them at any moment of weakness, so he had to sit by, watch the trial, and pray for the best. The best never came of course, so now, he was fulfilling his duties as a Hokage, a husband, a father for his remaining two, and a future grandfather. Naruto would just be another painful memory he had every time he shut his eyes. His greatest regret in life, and his most heartbreaking failure. In time, he hoped he would be able to see him once more before his time was up, but he doubted it. With his status as Hokage, of course he had special clearance to visit him as he wished and he had tried before, but Inoichi said Naruto adamantly refused to see him, threatening violence if he was forced. It was a slap to the face of course, and he couldn't understand why, but he didn't have to. If Naruto was happier living in solitude, then he was not going to force him to do anything. It still hurts like hell though. Signing off on the last document for the day, he leaned back into his chair with a sigh. Rolling out his neck, he turned his seat around to look out at the night sky, losing himself in thought. Thoughts of finally retiring so that he could finally spend some time with his family. It seemed all of his peers were doing so nowadays. Shikaku, Inoichi, and hell even Fugaku was getting ready to pass the strings over to Sasuke. But, he wasn't ready to hand the hat down to his son just yet. In other words, Menma wasn't ready. He had just made it into ANBU last year, so he was still learning how to follow orders. He was a long way away from giving them though. Maybe Kakashi. He thought with a chuckle, mentally imagining the silver-haired Jonin's protests. Sighing in content one last time, he got to his feet and left his office for the night. Ready to get home to his wife and put his worried mind at ease. The asylum, still drenched in its white interior design, was seeing the most excitement it had all day as Ino Yamanaka, the 18-year-old doctor, a chip off the old block from her father, stood at the front desk requesting another patient. The skinny man behind it adamantly tried to tell her there were no more as they were all booked. "There is no freaking way," she yelled out incredulously. The man shook his head somberly. "I am truly sorry Dr. Yamanaka, but they were all cleaned out this morning. Ibiki-san made sure they were all dealt with for the coming month," he said. "Yeah, he said he'd save one for me," she said in anger. The man just shrugged his shoulders looking around. There were no more clipboards left. This was her second week and it was already off to a bad start. Last week was her first time stepping foot in this place, but it got cut short thanks to an impromptu mission that required her abilities. This had been her goal for years. Her father would never let her come with him to even scout the place as he said it wasn't her time to be there. He wouldn't even talk about the cases as that would violate the doctor-patient confidentiality rule. Now that she was here, she was determined to prove herself an adequate psychologist. Inoichi had tried to keep her from the profession by telling her she was just too delicate to deal with those crazy people within. At first she was inclined to agree with him until he accented his statement by telling her she'd be better off working in the flower shop, picking daisies and whatnot. That was not something you said to Ino Yamanaka. How dare he demean her prowess as a kunoichi like that? She told him she was going to a psychologist whether he helped her or not. So, she took off in her pursuit to prove him wrong for what he said, and after a few weeks, her rage-filled journey to attest his belittling statement slowly turned into her new passion. She wanted to help these people that were in there for varying reasons. That's all she wanted to do was help them. It's been 2 weeks since she received her official status as a psychiatric doctor, and she had yet to have a true case. She had 2 last week that were laughably easy, so much so that she'd have believed the men were faking the entire time. She wanted something that would test her skill and prove her father wrong at the same time. That's when her eyes landed on one more clipboard in the far back of the administrative office. Her trained eyes locked onto it. The man turned towards it, unsure of whose it was as well. He walked back over to it and pulled it from the basket it was in. He read its content over, unsure why it was put in the back room like that. Reading the date it was last filled out, he gave a low whoa upon impulse. Ino waited patiently for him to tell her what it was until she ran out. "What is it?" "It's an older case." "Man, look at this rap sheet," he said, looking at the list of highly respected doctors that had worked on it. "Hey, I think your father worked on this one," he said, walking back over to her. Guess he had no luck either. Ino snatched the clipboard from his hands and looked at the section he was talking about, not even glancing at the top. There were a ton of people she knew from her father to even Anko. The name that caught her eye immediately, however, was the very last one. Dr. Uneo Yeager, the man who committed suicide 2 years back. Meaning, this was his last case. The case that pushed him over the edge. Her heart dropped almost immediately when she read the name Naruto Namikaze plastered at the top of the form. Maybe it was in the back for a reason. The man said, looking at the reactions play out on her face. When he didn't receive a reply, he tried to reach out and grab it from her. "Here, I'll you. No." She yelled a little louder than she meant to. Seeing his weird expression, she shook her head a bit before calming down. I mean, no, I'll take the case," she said as she placed it down on the counter and scribbled her signature beneath Dr. Yeager's. "Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. If you want the next part of this video, turn on that bell notification. Like, subscribe and comment down below. And also check out the others' videos I have created and enjoyed it. See you guys next video.